What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the OnePlus Nord N300 5G and going over whether or not it's actually worth buying in 2023. Now, this phone is definitely not old by any means, having only come out a few months ago, but since its release, a lot of other options have come out too, so we're going to be going over its specs and features to give you a better idea of what kind of value it actually provides. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the OnePlus Nord N300 5G, we're getting a decently large 6.56-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 269, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in general, we are getting a pretty decent display here, but really my main complaint is that with the 720p resolution, although it definitely doesn't look bad, I mean, for what it is, it's decently sharp, and if you're watching the occasional video every now and then, or maybe using social media or looking at a couple photos, you will get a decent experience, but compared to, I want to say, the vast majority of phones in this price range, stuff like the TCL Stylus 5G, Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, or any Motorola Moto G Stylus phone, they all have 1080p displays instead. And considering this phone is really not that much cheaper, or in the case of the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, it's not even cheaper at all. So with that in mind, I feel like the 720p display is definitely a drawback. At this point in 2023, especially for 5G phones, 1080p is really the way to go. So if you are going to be on your phone a lot watching content like videos, for example, or playing games, or really anything where the image quality is a bit more important, I feel like with this phone, despite it not really being bad, it's probably not the best choice. But other than that, aside from the 720p resolution, at 6.56 inches, the display is decently large, it has a nice tall and narrow form factor, and with the 90Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be decently fast and smooth, so the phone is going to feel a bit more premium. So in general, does this phone have a bad display? Definitely not. I do think it is pretty decent, but at the same time, if the display is a bit more important to you, if again, you're doing stuff like watching videos where the image quality is more important, then while the OnePlus Nord N300 5G is definitely not the worst choice, unless you're like getting this phone for free or something, then for the money, you can definitely do better. Now for storage, with the OnePlus Nord N300 5G, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so a pretty decent amount of storage here. On one hand, if you're someone who's constantly downloading all kinds of apps and games and stuff like that, I feel like you're probably going to want more than this, especially considering there are several phones in this general price range that have 128, which is quite a bit better. But all the same, 64GB, while not being a ton, is still at least acceptable, especially since again this phone does at least have microSD card expansion too. So for the average user, while it's still probably not ideal, you will at least get by here. Now for security features, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G does have Face Unlock, and it does have a nice fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, so can't go wrong with that. Let's give it a try real quick. There we go, one more time. And there we go, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. Now for the camera setup here, up front, we got a water drop notch for the selfie camera, pretty typical design, although I will say for a OnePlus phone it's kinda disappointing because I believe the OnePlus Nord N200 5G did have a hole punch instead, which I personally think is a lot nicer, but at the end of the day it's not really that big a deal. And this camera is 16 megapixels, so pretty decent quality. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. Now, this is where things can be kind of a drawback because on one hand, not every phone in this price range has an ultra wide camera, like the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G for example. That phone only has a depth sensing camera and a macro camera and then of course a main camera. But there are phones like the TCL Stylus 5G for example, which again are in pretty much the same price range, and that phone does have an ultra wide camera, and in this price range, pretty much every phone besides this one has a macro camera, so overall when it comes to features, not really the best here, but aside from this, I will say the main camera is actually really good. Now, to be fair, it's not really exceptionally better than other phones like it, so if you're comparing this to say the A14 5G or the TCL Stylus 5G or honestly even lower end phones than this, it's not really amazing or anything like that, but at the same time for what it is. If you're really not concerned about having a bunch of different camera features, maybe you never use an ultra wide camera or a macro camera, and you're really just taking normal pictures or maybe using portrait mode, then in that case, you're not even going to notice this camera setup doesn't have a ton of features. So yeah, overall, for that kind of use, for more casual camera users, I do think the OnePlus Nord N300 5G will get the job done. And I guess I should also mention for video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, which I am not surprised by at all, but in case you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, for example, and you're expecting every phone at this point to be able to record 4K videos, just keep in mind, unfortunately, even at this point in 2023, that's not the case, and most phones that are under, I want to say, $300 or $400 are still going to max out at 1080p. Now, to give you an idea of what it can do, here are some pictures taken with the OnePlus Nord N300 5G, and again, I do think the photo quality here for what it is really good, and honestly, for the average user, as long as you're okay with not having an ultra-wide camera or a macro camera, it will definitely get the job done. I do think the image quality in general is really sharp, and the details look really nice, the brightness is decent, and the colors are pretty good too without being oversaturated. So in general, if you're taking pictures for like Instagram or any kind of social media for that matter, or maybe something like Snapchat or sending photos to friends and family where you still might want things to look nice but you don't really need insane quality, in that kind of situation, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G has the camera to get the job done just fine, and you're probably not going to need a whole lot else. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the OnePlus Nord N300 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 810 processor. Now overall, the performance on this phone is actually pretty good, especially considering it's like a $230 phone and most people are going to be getting it for quite a bit less. So if you are looking for more of an entry-level device, but you still want nice performance for more basic activities, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G will be a great choice for that. And if you're doing mostly stuff like casual web browsing, social media use, watching videos, listening to music, and maybe playing a couple less intensive games, for that sort of activity, while not being the fastest phone out there, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G is definitely good for what it is. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device, because depending on what you have, it may or may not actually be an upgrade. But I will say compared to other phones in this price range, it's, I want to say, a little bit faster, maybe not that much, and honestly in the grand scheme of things, when you compare this phone to something like the Motorola Moto G 5G or the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, TCL Stylus 5G, the T-Mobile Revel phones, or really any number of entry-level 5G phones in 2023, you're really not going to see an insane performance difference. Although again, technically score-wise, I do think this phone is a little bit better than average, but overall, I feel like in this price range, you could get pretty much any phone around this general level, and the performance experience is going to be pretty much the same. But that being said, I feel like at this point in 2023, the average 5G phone is at least decently fast, so if you're doing more basic activities and you're not really going to be on your phone all day doing stuff like playing Fortnite or something that requires a lot of processing power, and you're really just going to be using the phone as a phone for the most part, in that kind of situation, you probably don't need a whole lot more than this. But of course, if you really want a super high-end, closer to flagship level experience, then you will want to get something a bit faster. Now the OnePlus Nord N300 5G has a great battery. With a 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get great battery life and longevity here. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger and you really need a phone that's going to last all day without being charged, in that case, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G will be a great choice. And then of course, down the road as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with a larger battery like this, it's not going to wear out nearly as quickly as a much smaller battery. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time without having to replace it, then you're definitely not going to go wrong with this phone. And in addition to this, with the OnePlus Nord N300 5G, the battery does support 33 watt fast charging, so the charging speed on this phone is definitely really good. And keep in mind, to fully utilize a phone's fast charging, you of course do need an actually good fast charger. So for example, if a phone has like 20 watt fast charging, you need a 20 watt charger or better. And with this phone, you do need a 33 watt charger. And while most phones at this point in 2023 don't even have wall adapters, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G actually comes with this really large 33 watt charger, so you can use its full fast charging right away. You don't have to go get one yourself. And I feel like at this point in 2023, again, the average phone, even the really cheap ones, usually don't even come with any kind of wall adapter, and if they do, it's a really weak 5 watt one. So in general, if you really do care about charging speeds, then for what it is, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G actually gives us a lot of value. Now for the software, this phone actually originally came with Android 12, which was kind of disappointing considering it came out in like January or February. So at that point, seeing that the current version of Android was still Android 13, I was definitely expecting that, but luckily we did get an update to Android 13 now, so it is current, so that's no longer a drawback here. But I will say when Android 14 comes out in probably December-ish. I don't know if it's actually going to get the update. I want to assume it will, but you never know. And while OnePlus's software support has gotten better over time, it's still no Samsung, so if you're hoping to keep a phone for maybe a couple years and still have the latest version of Android, this might not be the best choice for you, but if you just want the latest current version of Android, you will be perfectly fine here. As far as other features go, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G does have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you'll be happy to know you can do that with this phone, no problem. And in addition to this, we do actually get a headphone jack here, which on one hand you might think this isn't even worth mentioning, but keep in mind, maybe not necessarily around this exact price range, but a bit above it, something like the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G or A53 5G or that kind of level. Even more budget phones around this price range, like the Blue Bolt N2 for example, lots of them just don't have headphone jacks anymore for whatever reason. It started in flagship phones and now we're starting to see more and more mid-range phones that don't have it, and eventually I feel like maybe in a couple years, they're just not going to be headphone jacks anymore. Now, I could be completely wrong, but that seems to be the way things are going, so just in case you're wondering, again, yes, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G does still have a headphone jack. Now taking a look at the overall design, it does look pretty nice, which is pretty much what I would expect from any OnePlus phone. Now that being said though, by OnePlus standards, I feel like it could be better. Again, we have that water drop notch for the front facing camera. I feel like this is kind of a step back because most OnePlus phones have hole punches instead, so it definitely doesn't look as premium as say the OnePlus Nord N200 5G or the N20, but at the same time I guess it's okay. The side bezels are decently thin, although the bottom one is a little bit thicker, but in general the phone has a pretty nice slim premium design. I really like the camera module. The build quality also feels pretty good. The materials are solid, although it's definitely made of plastic, but honestly most people are probably going to be using a case anyway, so that most likely doesn't really matter. And also keep in mind the phone has a good amount of weight to it, so in general, despite being a more affordable device, it does feel decently premium. But in conclusion, is the OnePlus Nord N300 5G still worth buying in 2023? That kind of sounds funny to say considering this phone actually came out in 2023, but in general I would say yes, with the one caveat that I would not pay full price for this phone. At full price it goes for around $229, and for that price, well, it's not really terrible. I know you can do quite a bit better in pretty much every way, but that being said, considering the carrier deals with this phone, you're probably going to get it for pretty cheap if not free. So if you do get this phone for maybe $100 or even free, it is a good choice if you're looking for something for more basic activities. Maybe you're not really going to be on your phone a lot, maybe you're doing more low intensive things like web browsing, social media, taking pictures, or watching a couple of videos every now and then. For that kind of use, this phone will be perfectly fine. It has a great battery, pretty good performance, and a really nice camera, albeit pretty featureless, but for the things that typically really count, it does do a pretty good job. So in general, if you are looking for a more basic entry-level device, the OnePlus Nord N300 5G, despite not being the absolute best choice at full price, is still at least worth considering. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.